Daniel Truman was an older guy I used to work with. All things considered, he was a decent person, though he was one of those folks who had a story for about any occasion, almost anything that anyone else may have experienced. He had a tale to top it, and it could be annoying at times, but I don't believe he ever meant any harm. Perhaps he only craved being in the spotlight for a while. Maybe he had a few insecurities which could potentially have been momentarily eased by making himself the center of attention for a time. Regardless of his reasons, little to nobody actually believed his supposed recollections, as the majority of them sounded to be quite fictional. Oftentimes he could successfully gain the respect of the new hires, or even some who had worked there for a while, who may not be all that familiar with him and his ways. Though he could tend to spin a well-crafted yarn, I would feel my eyes rolling when he would take it upon himself to repeat the same tales over and over again, depending on his respective audience at the time. He was getting up in years, so it could not be denied that it was somewhat impressive that he would recite each one verbatim, whether he had only told it the day before or half a decade ago. Still, I highly doubted he truly had done everything from thwarting an attempted bank robbery with no more than an expertise in the martial arts to guide his actions, to witnessing an extraterrestrial ship crashing down near his old workplace. Something he was forced to swear on a stack of Bibles that he would never speak of. I can't say I didn't have a fondness for the old guy, though. Sure, his ways could quickly get under my skin when I was simply not in the mood for his endless rambling, but I would just sneak away when I wasn't feeling it. It wasn't hard to get away when things were quiet at work, but those were often the times he would feel inspired to talk the most. More often than not, I would humor him with the mandatory one-word replies, or the occasional "ah" and "ah" as his tales would reach their climax. I may even grant him an occasional "holy shit" if I was in the mood to butter his popcorn a bit. He was harmless, really, and he would get a glint in his eye like a kid on Christmas morning when any of us would eat up the crap he was attempting to feed us. It wasn't until the day I returned to work after a 2-week sabbatical due to my father's passing, when he told me his story, I actually believed. On any normal day, he would practically perform his tales, darting his eyes between each person in the room, gesturing with his hands to increase the intensity, while dramatically pausing, in between raising and lowering the tone of his voice to fit the subject matter. But not this one. On this occasion, he didn't so much as glance in my direction while he spoke in an almost monotone voice. Another unique component to this one was that he would actually pause when anyone entered the office. Generally, he would backtrack to catch the new audience member up to speed. But it would seem this one was for me, and me alone. I wasn't exactly in the best mindset when I arrived back at work that day. Though my father had battled cancer for the better part of 3 years, it was still a shock when he finally lost the fight. I had always been close to my parents, so I'd spent the majority of those 14 days off the job, caring for my mother, while taking little time to allow myself to face my own grief. She was slowly coming back to herself, but she had suffered almost as much as her husband over these past years, perhaps more so. In some ways, she was actually relieved the fight was over, but she was still without her soulmate, regardless of the fact he would no longer have to suffer. My fellow employees from the previous shift were still in the office when I arrived. Each gave me their sympathies, while making the token inquiries as to how I was holding up, and such. But I wanted a little more than to be left alone. Though I appreciated the well wishes and condolences, I was not in the mood to talk about it. After they filtered out, leaving me alone with Truman, I just headed to my desk, keeping my head lowered in an attempt to convey how much I didn't want to talk about things. For the first few hours, he respected my need for silence. It wasn't until I returned from a bathroom break that he began to speak. I was just 12 when I lost my pa. I felt my neck tense up, instantly feeling anger pulse through my veins. Surely he didn't feel the need to one-up me on something like this, I thought while keeping my back turned to the man in an effort to encourage him to cease his desire to get a win on something like this. I know you're hurting, kid. Just tell me to shut the hell up if you don't want to hear me ramble on. There was something sincere in his voice. Something compassionate and genuine I had never heard from him. I turned my chair around to face the man, only to find he still had his back to me. Though I truly had no desire to hear some far-fetched yarn, perhaps concerning how his youth frame was far too weak to successfully wrestle the alligator into submission as it chewed on his daddy's throat. His tone and mannerisms were far from the norm. I found myself growing quite curious as to what he had to say. Ramble away, I said with a very false and forced chuckle. He returned an equally imitated laugh before he began to speak again. The story he shared with me that day has stayed with me these past few years. A tale I would like to share with you now, should you have the interest in hearing it. I will try to the best of my ability to recount the words as he spoke them, though I can't promise it'll be a 100% to the letter. Still, I will not exaggerate nor will I inflate his words to anything more grandiose than they were. The following is the last story Daniel Truman ever shared with me. It was a small town I lived in with my folks back then. Far smaller than this one. Little place called Rimrose Fall. A couple of 100 miles to the south of here. Wasn't nothing special, but I hadn't ever been nowhere else when I was young. Mama had some ailments, ain't no need speaking about, but she'd have need of going into the city every few weeks or so to see some better doctors than the ones we had back home. My pappy had been promising to take me fishing for the last months or so, but it'd been hard to find the time between Mama and his work. We'd go from time to time, but it wasn't a good drive to get to the lake he favored, so we'd always have to plan it out pretty good. I'd ask him sometimes why we couldn't just head up to Boulder Creek, being that was just a couple miles from where we lived, but he'd tell me we had no business going there. He said there was some local fishermen types that didn't take too kindly to others taking up their spot, though I had never seen no one else when we passed by it in Pappy's truck. He wouldn't hear it though. Made me swear I'd never even think about going out there. But I didn't understand at the time. You know how it is when you're that age. Got everything figured out by then and can't nobody tell you otherwise. That Thursday, May 16th, 1968, Pop set it up where he was going to spend the whole day with me. He was going to take off work and said we'd go fishing. Just have a good old time, just the two of us. He was even going to let me skip out on going to the schoolhouse, just so we could get some father-son time in. I was plumb thrilled, and it was all I thought about for the 2 weeks that went by after he told me. Mama had seen her doctor that week before the 16th, so she should have been good while we was gone. Of course, her situation was a mite unpredictable, so when we got to that Thursday, she took a turn. Pappy didn't have no choice but to take her back into the city. He told me he was sorry, and I could tell he meant it, on account of how much he was looking forward to catching some fish too. Still, I can't say I wasn't none too thrilled about how it turned out. I didn't pitch a fit or nothing, but I didn't exactly put on an understanding face neither. Pop told me I didn't have to come with him to see the doctor, even though I'd already taken the school day off, but he promised we'd get that trip soon. Just had to prioritize the important things. He could tell I was upset, but I didn't take no measures to convince him or Mom or otherwise. I know it wasn't her fault, and I knew she was in bad shape when she took a turn, but I must have come off like a damn brat at the time. Pop looked plumb sad when he helped Mama into the truck, and I'm sure I could have made him feel better if I'd made some sort of effort, but I didn't. Still feel bad for that to this day. But I know I was just a kid. Don't make it no better though. I was still moping around the house a good hour after they took off. It had been some time since I last got to go fishing. So when I look back at the tackle box we'd already set out by the front door, I just about had my mind made up before he even registered. Boulder Creek was only a ways from the house, and if I could load the box and fishing pole onto my back, I could have been there and back before anyone was the wiser. I knew my folks weren't likely to be back till after sundown, so I could surely catch a few and still be back before they knew it. I reckon I was just about as stubborn as a mule and hard-headed as an ox, so I didn't care that Pappy made me promise never to go there. I figured he just didn't trust me enough to be able to get around all that wild bush and such out there without hurting myself, so he made some stuff up to keep me from going. I strapped the tackle box to the back of my bike with some old belts I'd done grown out of. I used some twine to tie around a pole to sling around my shoulder. Even strapped a bowie knife I had gotten for Christmas to my belt, just in case I had to scare off some critters or something. It was a bit awkward to ride with the box and rod, but it wasn't nothing I couldn't deal with. The trail was rough, and I damn near tipped over on some of the lumpier parts. Before I knew it, I was clearing the trees that surrounded the creek. I had never seen it up close before, only from the road up on the hill. It sure was pretty. It was an almost perfect circle, with thinner streams branching off here and there. In the middle there was a small mound of dirt, with a giant rock sticking out of it. I suppose that's how it got the name Boulder Creek, though it's a mite unoriginal given the island's made of stone. The water looked as clear as if you just poured it out from a jug, and I could see the fish zigging and zagging under the surface. Weren't no wild underbrush neither. I couldn't see no bottom to the lake, but the water was clear as far as my youthful eyes could see. Still, I wasn't the best swimmer, so I wasn't about to let myself get too close to it or nothing. I wasn't that curious to see how deep it went. While I got to unloading the tackle box, pulling the twine from the rod and baiting the hook, I kept looking around for any signs of the locals Pop warned me about. Given this was only a short ways from the house, I didn't see no reason why I wouldn't be considered a local, but I still didn't see no trace of anybody besides myself. The grass was overgrown, in between patches of flat dirt and rocks, and it didn't look as if nobody had been out this way in weeks at least. Wasn't no bent blades or footprints. Hell, I couldn't even hear no signs of wildlife nearby, except for the fish under the water. Weren't no crickets chirping, or squirrels running up and down the trees, no birds flapping around in the woods or up in the sky above me. It was kind of peaceful, but a bit eerie too. Everything being so quiet but me. Still, I went ahead with what I was there for and cast my line out into the creek. I could see the fish scatter as soon as the hook dropped in on them, so I just took a seat on the tackle box and stayed as still as a deer in headlights. I figured they'd gather back up once they felt it wasn't nothing to be scared of. I was gonna toss back whatever I caught anyways. Couldn't go bringing any back to the house when I was done. I didn't want Pop to know I'd disobeyed him. He wasn't never one to tan my hide unless I really had it coming, but I figured this get me a good whooping on account of how he made me promise and all. My boots were getting good and muddy too, so I figured I'd either clean them up when I got back or just tell him I was playing around outside. Surely he'd have no reason to suspect otherwise. I swear, when I got my first bite, I had to wrestle that sumbitch for a good 10 minutes straight. When I reeled her in, she had to be a good 6 pounds at least, maybe 1.5 feet long too. That might be no more than average for some, but it was the biggest sucker I'd ever seen at that age. After I let that one go, I didn't have so much luck. Biggest I reeled in after that was maybe 1 pound or 2. But I pulled a good 5 or 6 from that lake before the sun started to sink. I knew I had to be getting back, but I wished I could have told Pappy about how many I caught. I just knew if I could convince him to come out, we could have supper for a month. Still, I wasn't about to confess I did what he said not to. After I got the tackle box strapped back down, I was tying the twine back to the fishing pole. I heard a whimpering coming from nearby. It'd been so damn quiet. I had taken to keeping my breath shallow and damn near tiptoeing around. You know how it is. Even if you got no reason to be quiet, you kinda act like it when there ain't no sounds other than you. I suppose that's why the sound damn near caused my heart to skip. The grass was growed out pretty tall, and nothing had been cut down or maintained, so I couldn't see nothing from where the whimpering was coming from, even though it sounded like it was just some yards behind me. Being as curious as any kid that age, I had to see what was causing it. The closer I got, the more it sounded like another kid was crying. I hadn't seen no one else the whole time I'd been there, but I hadn't looked around much neither. It scared me something awful to think there might have been someone hurt and passed out while I was having a good old time, none to wise it. Could be they'd just started to come to, as I was getting ready to set off back home. All manner of things was going through my head the closer I got. It wasn't until I was right on where the whimpering was coming from that it stopped. I swatted at the tall grass and was cutting my eyes this way and that. But there weren't no sounds no more, but me. Soon as I shrugged the whole thing off and made to head back to my bike, I noticed I couldn't lift my legs no more. I looked down, pushing the grass away so I could see my feet, to see some sort of light shining from beneath me. Damn near pissed my pants when I saw the shadowy hands gripping around my shoes too. There must have been 5 or 6 of them, just tiny little hands gripping onto my feet and ankles. I hollered out as loud as I could, while I was pulling at my legs trying to break them free of the tight-gripped fingers. But I couldn't do so much as yank my feet out of my shoes. I didn't stop screaming out with every bit of my lungs, even when the hands pulled me down into the other place. It didn't even feel like I went through the grass and dirt, as much as there just wasn't no ground beneath my feet for a minute. Knocked myself out cold when I hit the other ground that was under the one I was on before. Soon as I come to, I started hollering again. I didn't know if I was still asleep and dreaming, or if the giant shadow man who stood over me was real. He's bigger than anything I'd ever seen before, with bright red glowing eyes. That was the only thing I could make out on him, on account of the rest of being no more than a shadow. I didn't see no signs of the little ones whose hands pulled me through from up top neither. Just the big un, staring at me. I was still whimpering some even after my yells gave out. The thing still looked down on me, tilting his head from one side to the other. But I didn't think he was the one that was making the other sounds I was hearing. There was some sort of clicking or snapping, in a way. It was dark and kind of foggy all around me, but I could still make out a little. The walls almost looked as if they was wood, but the grains didn't flow like no wood I'd ever seen. It ain't easy to explain, but things wasn't shaped like they are here, you know? It looked like there was 4 walls, but also as if there was more. I couldn't see no sort of ceiling, and the ground I was laying on didn't feel like nothing natural or man-made. The clicking sounds was all around me, and no matter where I turned my head, I couldn't see where it was coming from, even though it sounded like it was right beside me. Soon as the shadow thing wrapped its hand around both my legs and lifted me from the floor, my bladder couldn't hold back no more. The thing had to be 10 times my height at the time. I was kinda small for my age, but I still hadn't ever seen nothing this big. While I dangled in front of the Shadow Man's red eyes, I could make out more of its features, though that ain't saying much. It had jet black skin and a sort of plain face, normal enough nose and mouth and all, but when it licked its lips while it stared me down, I could see that even its tongue and teeth were black. It was like looking at a negativity of a picture or something. On top of that, from up high where I was hanging, I can make out more of what stood under me. This will likely sound even crazier than a 20-foot shadowy man, but I swear to the good Lord they looked like man-sized praying mantises. They was hiding behind that odd haze that made the one that held me look like nothing more than a shadow at first, so it was hard to focus my eyes on them. Could be they was nothing more than some menfolk in costumes, but they didn't move like no man I'd ever seen. Can't rightly say whether the one that held me or the giant bugs clicking at each other had me more unsettled, but I was sure as I was done for nonetheless. It felt like the big one moved in slow motion almost, but it still hurt something awful when he slapped my body onto some sort of hard slab that growed out of the ground before my eyes. Knocked the wind out of me too. When he stood back up, he looked like nothing more than a shadow again. But the mantis things moved in closer to where I was laying. One of them was holding some sort of chains or straps or something, and the other had some odd-looking tools of some kind. One of them looked kinda like some pliers my pop had in the garage, and the other reminded me of the needles the doc would stick in Mama's arms. But they wasn't made of no metal or glass I'd ever seen. I was shivering from my head to toes, and squalling as loud as I could. I was sure no one or nothing could hear me, but I was screaming for help anyways. When I heard what sounded like a blade being sharpened from somewhere in the darkness, it dawned on me that I still had my Bowie knife strapped to my belt. Pappy had told me to be extra careful when he'd given it to me for Christmas, on account of the edge he'd ground onto it. He shaved the hairs off his arms to show me how sharp it was. Sure enough, it left a shiny bald spot on his forearm in a second or two. Soon as one of the giant bugs made to pull a strap over my chest, I pulled my blade and swapped it across its arms, or leg, or whatever it was it held out. Whatever it was, I cut it short, and it let out a squeal like I ain't never heard. The other one came at me. I stuck it with my blade too, carved into whatever sort of flesh it had like a hot stick of butter. Both of them were hollering themselves now, and the big one came reaching for me. Soon as I dodged to the side, which I weren't none too hard on account of how slow it moved, I heard a sort of muffled yell from outside of that room. It was hard to tell, with it coming from what I supposed to be the outside world, but it sounded like someone was calling my name. I didn't see no doors or much of nothing else, and I couldn't tell what direction the voice was coming from, so I just screamed out, "I'm in here!" as loud as I could. I just kept hollering out the same words over and over while dodging the big guy and swatting at him with my buoy. Soon as I run the blade across the hand, it stretched out, causing it to squeal out in another unsettling sort of sound. I saw something else that damn near turned my hair white. Maybe 10 feet over the spot I was laying, or when I came to, I saw a normal enough human-looking arm reaching through a sort of blue glowing hole. The mantis, whose arm was a bit shorter now, was helping the other one back up from the floor, so I knew I didn't have long. Without even thinking, I run for the hole. I leapt for the hand soon as I got within range, but I missed it and fell back onto the ground, damn near knocked the wind out of me again. I ain't sure if this will make any sense. Hell, I ain't sure if none of this makes any kind of sense. But that clicking sound was a lot more aggravated than it was before. They was both coming at me, and the big end was coming back into view behind me too. The one I stuck wasn't moving fast, and neither was the shadow thing, but the other was charging pretty good. I jumped up again, but I couldn't get within a shout of the hand that was dangling down from elsewhere. I was gonna have to get a running start if I hoped to get close enough. With the big one on one side and the bugs on the other, I was running out of options. I just run straight at the mantis that was charging me, swinging my blade from side to side, just hoping I could get it to back off. My pants were still soaked on account of my bladder giving out, but my tiny legs were still scurrying like a mouse. Soon as my buoy made contact with the gut of that giant bug, it hit the ground, clutching at his middle. The other wasn't far behind, but it stopped in place while I was still waving the knife around like a madman. I saw the big one reach for the arm that was poking through the hole, so I didn't have no more time to waste. I just ran as fast as I could. When I got close enough, I jumped as high as my legs could take me. I grabbed onto the arm with both hands, letting my knife hit the ground. I didn't mean to drop it, but I didn't want to risk not holding on tight enough, and I sure enough didn't want to poke it into the one that was trying to pull me out. Before I knew it, I was laying in the tall grass. Panting and wheezing, worse than I did the first time I smoked a cigarette. While I lay there catching my breath, my pappy pulled me in close, gripping me tight and not letting go. Soon as I realized it was his arm what poked through the doorway between this place and the other, I got scared he'd holler at me for not listening. Seemed all he cared about at the time was that I was alright. I was still shaking all over and crying my eyes red. So was he, truth be told. I was saying I was sorry over and over, but he just held me tight, rubbing my back. I still think he was trying to calm me down, but he was as tore up as I was. It was dark out by this point, so I didn't know how long I'd been down there, nor how long he might have been looking for me. I figured he got home and seen the tackle box gone. Likely didn't take him long to put together where I'd gone off to. He was always a smart one, my pop. Once he got me calmed down, he patted me on my back and told me to go on and get my bike. I held up for a minute to wait for him, but he told me to get on home, and he'd be there shortly. At first I thought he was fixing to jump back down the hole and show them monsters a thing or two, but even as strong as my pappy was, I thought that'd be a bad idea. It wasn't until I got close to the edge of the creek when I looked back to see him just watching me with a smile on his face. It wasn't his normal smile though. He still had tears dripping down, but there was something else in his face I couldn't figure out. We just stared at each other for a minute or two before he just closed his eyes. As soon as it hit me what was happening, I charged back over to where he stood, rooted in place. I was maybe a few feet from him when he got pulled under. I dug around the ground where we'd sat hugging and crying, but it was only dirt and grass. Weren't no signs of any sort of hole or entrance to the other place. I still clawed at that ground till my fingernails bent back and my skin tore. I was hollering and wailing again, but there weren't no signs of him, nor where he'd went. Seems whatever door he pulled me out of had closed as soon as he went through it. I rode back home faster than I knew I could. Maybe took me half the time to get back than it had to get out to the creek in the first place. I told my mama what happened, and she was all kinda shook. She called the sheriff to come out, but I didn't know if he could help me with something like this. He was an older feller, likely as old as I am now, but he didn't seem to think too kindly about going out to Boulder Creek. I was pitching a fit and Mama was causing a fuss too, so he finally gave in and headed up the trail with Deputy Mills. He was half the age of the sheriff, but he come off like his shit smelled pretty. Looked down his nose at me and Mama as if we ain't have no rights to call him. Still, he didn't look none too thrilled about going up to the old creek neither. But the trail was wide enough for the car to get him close, for they'd have to go on foot the rest of the way. They wouldn't let me or Ma come with them, on account of it being unsafe if a crime had been committed. I still wanted to go, but I couldn't leave Mama alone. She was all manner of upset, and I was still tore up myself. I didn't think they would know what to look for, but I didn't trust them to put a lot of work into looking. It was somewheres around midnight when they come back, but they didn't turn nothing up. I figured they wouldn't, but they had dried mud and dirt all over their fingernails and covering their shirts and pants, so it looked as though they'd at least tried, more than I thought they would anyways. Both of them looked plumb and rattled, as the deputy was white as a ghost. They had me fill out some paperwork, but it read like I was all kinda crazy when I read it back. The sheriff told me he'd get together a search party and do what they could to find Pop, but they never did turn nothing up. Weren't no body found or nothing. It was like he just vanished from the earth altogether. Suppose that's about the truth of it anyways. He warned me to never go up to Boulder Creek again, but I still would from time to time. When my uncle would come to take Mama into the city to see the doc, I never found much of nothing neither, but every now and then, when I would just sit still in the quiet of the place, I could swear I'd hear someone call out from somewhere far away. Could have just been my mind playing tricks though. I always told myself I'd go back up that ways again someday. It's my fault he got pulled down there in my place. I should have listened to him when he told me not to go there. But I was just too damn hard-headed to hear it. I know I ain't got no one to blame but myself for what happened, but Mama never blamed me, not once. She mourned for my Pop, but she still loved me with her whole heart until it gave out. I still hold out hope that Pappy found my Bowie knife and hacked them things to bits before they could strap him down to that slab. I know I left him hurting, a good bit, but I didn't know about that big un, nor whatever them little hands was neither. Could be he's still down there, looking for a way out. Even if he would be pushing 90 by now. He was the toughest sumbitch I ever knew. He would never go down without taking them with him. I know this story likely sounds like the rambling of a mad old man. Lord knows I've told you more than my share of wild ones over the years. And I ain't got no doubt I was full of shit on most of them. You was always kind enough to play along when I'd spin the same old yarns time after time. And I can't thank you enough for that, kid. I was never the same after I lost my pop. And I suppose I still got a screw or two loose. But you never made fun or showed me no sort of disrespect. You're a good kid. And I appreciate you humoring me this one last time. With all the crap I've fed you over the years, I can't neither ask nor expect you to believe this one to be true, but hand to God, this one may be the only truth I've ever told you. I ain't never seen no aliens, and I for damn sure couldn't fight off no armed robbers to save my life. But there are some things out there, kid. Some things we weren't never meant to see nor meet. I can't rightly say where that creek sent me that day, nor where my pappy ended up, but to this day, I still wish I had answers to it all. I'm sure I ain't got too many years left ahead of me, and I sure as hell ain't getting no younger. Always wondered what I'd find if I just kept digging, though I don't think there was so much under the earth as under the world. Somewhere's under the surface of what we know to be. Maybe, though. We were interrupted by the graveyard shift coming in, and I never had a chance to find out where that sentence would lead. Before he headed out for the night, Truman clapped me on the shoulder and shook my hand. He said he was truly sorry for my loss and told me to take care of myself. There was something more genuine in his voice than I had ever heard. I think I knew that would be the last time I saw him. That one final story almost felt like a confession he needed to get off his chest, and I feel proud that he entrusted those last words to me. He never handed in any notice, nor did he just outright quit the job he had held for the better part of 20 years. He just didn't come in the next day, nor any that followed. There was no obituary, no funeral, simply no sign of where he went. But I had a feeling I knew what his destination had been after he clocked out that one last time. His wife had died some years back, and his 2 sons had moved away after college. So nobody knew much of anything about where Daniel Truman's future carried him. Some time back, I considered taking a trip to his old homestead to look for answers, but I could find absolutely no information on the town of Rimrose Fall, let alone the creek which sat just away behind it. Maybe I just didn't look hard enough, or didn't entirely want to be tempted to follow up on where such a quest could lead me. There are some mysteries out there that are best left unsolved. Still, as completely out there as his story was, I believed every single word to this day. It could be that he just changed the name of the town to prevent me from temptation. Of course, it most certainly could have been no more than just another tall tale he told me that day. One last bizarre product of an imaginative mind. Just one more for the road. But I don't think so. Not this one. I like to camp and fish from time to time, but I never retreat to the more secluded spots of the world anymore. Maybe I'm just a gullible idiot, or a little bit intimidated by the possibilities, but maybe not. Perhaps we are a little more than fish in a barrel to those who dwell beneath, should we be unfortunate enough to cross into their territory. I did purchase a fairly hefty Bowie knife for when I do take those trips out into the woods. That along with my pistol. It never hurts to be prepared, after all. I truly hope that Daniel Truman is still out there somewhere, bending the ear of many who may have grown as tired of his tales as I had at one time. For most I have crossed paths with over the years. I would wish them well, and hope they find what they are looking for in life. But not Truman. I hate to think what he may have found if he did go in search of it. If you're able to make it this far, then thank you. If you wish to support the channel, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, of course. Also, hit the bell icon if you want any notifications as to when the next video is coming out. If you want to go a step further and support us, there's a link to the Patreon at the very bottom of this video, along with links to the author's original story and other information if you're curious to find. And as always, all are welcome in the hand of horror. Even you.